This is something that I realize now has been important to me from the beginning of my life through now. I think when people do a lot of writing, you start to identify these themes in your own life. So I might have some themes like, even though I want to be powerful and I don't want to be limited, I'm also a caregiver and a nurturer. I became a nurse. I think in your life, you have these big themes and your sub themes. Get to know yourself, not what other people think. I'm old enough now to know what's not important, what is important. And I think you find your themes in your experiences, your reaction to them, and casting off the voices that are not yours.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. So, in a world that often tells us to be quiet, to make ourselves small, how do we reclaim our wild souls? Well, on today's podcast, we have Amy Lou Jenkins, who has made it her life's work to untangle the knots within and blaze a trail toward courageous living. Her bestseller, Every Natural Fact, follows Amy and her young son into the heart of the Midwest wilderness and the uncharted depths of her own becoming. So, today's podcast is going to be all about Amy and her book, and very interestingly enough, the themes behind writing, how we create a meaningful theme. So, Amy, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm very excited to be here and honored. You've had such wonderful writers across all different fields, and I come with a respect for all those genres.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So, stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Thank you so much for that. And you clearly have a respect for genres and writing, but also a passion for it too, from what I've been, learning more about you. So I think you're an excellent person to offer your insights today. So let's talk about you really quick first, though. What prompted you to leave your nursing career and pursue writing?
Well, when I was in third grade, my teacher told me, Amy, you're going to be a writer. And of course, that didn't sound practical. And I thought, well, that was something rich people did. I was going to have to work for a living. And so I didn't consider it. But then in high school, I won a kind of a big essay contest from the Cole Foundation. And I won this summer of exploring urban America. But still, I did the practical thing and entered nursing, which was wonderful. I became a director of a home health agency, a nonprofit. And, it's interesting, Authors on a Mission. I knew the mission statement of the nonprofit I worked for, and we were to serve a wide cultural and economic spectrum. And they served a lot of rich people. And they told me they were going to close a program I had started. It was a program that helped young disabled people like paraplegic, quadriplegic, or really advanced arthritis, but young people to be able to live in their homes versus a nursing home.
Okay.
And I remember they said they're going to close the program. And I remember coming home from work just crying and upset and telling my husband, and he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm not going to be a part of this. I'm not going to send them back to nursing homes, and I can't stop it. He asked me again, what are you going to do? And through tears and big blubbering, I said, I'm going to go back to school and study literature and writing. So,
Oh,
and I had no idea that was going to come out of me.
wow.
But I had been writing and publishing essays and articles as a nurse and also in creative writing.
Yeah.
And silly me didn't even know enough. I applied to Bennington. I didn't know that was hard to get into, or I would have been intimidating. But it was complicated. But I got into Bennington, studied with some awesome people, and started publishing more, and taught college writing and taught in a lot of workshops. And it's been writing and reading and life of letters ever since.
Wow, well, that's a very powerful story. I actually was I didn't think that that was just how we were gonna tell it, but that's it's incredible that it came from like almost like a tragedy, like a breaking point in your life, and you kind of just turned it and pivoted 180 and turned into what you actually wanted to do, your dreams. Like that's just beautiful that you're able to do that. And here you are today with, so much accomplishments and of course every natural fact. So yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know then, after you went to the school and you got out of Bennington, what inspired your memoir, Every Natural Fact? Like, what point did you say, let me write about myself and my experiences? Was there a certain
Well,
point?
I had one of my teachers from Bennington, who is a wonderful writer. He's a National Book Award winner, Bob Chicocious. Um, he told me, Amy, there's something very different. I had written an essay that he had read about a woman and her son in nature, and it's a kind of a voice I've never seen before. Now, I want to admit, I went to an East Coast college. I loved it. I loved everything about it, but there was a little hoidiness, like, I'm from the Midwest and you're going to do nature writing? Like, is this legit? But Bob Chicocious didn't have any of those pretensions. And he was like, oh, I love your voice here. And so I thought, well, this is a way for me to have these great experiences. And if he thinks I have some talent for writing this kind of essay, and that's what I want to do, I get to go, tromp around the woods with my son.
Right.
And what I loved about the whole experience is I didn't go in to these experiences. We walked all these paths. I studied, like, what are we likely to see? What's going to happen? But I didn't know what was going to come up. And my son was about 11 when I started this. And this is the time that children look like they want to pull away. But you're out in the woods. We didn't take our phones, so, the phones were in their pockets. We're just attending to each other. So, when you're out in the woods, you're not connected to your phone, to the salesmanship of civilization. You're just there, and a conversation could take a long time. And what we came across and what we experienced um, developed thematically as we are walking. So, our very first walk, it was spring, and we went to a marsh, land, water. And I have in my head this concern that as a woman, I've had some problems with men. Maybe I'm the only one
I
in
think
my
we all have
life.
at some point.
Yes. And I'm not just speaking romantically either, but career-wise, expectations, being pigeonholed. And I realized, I've got some inner, um, like, I wonder if I'm holding a grudge. And certainly as my son is going to grow into manhood, I better deal with that. And the beautiful thing about going out in nature and seeing what happens is I could watch these themes developing as we were walking. I'm in a marsh, land, water, male, female, young, old. And I realized actually about halfway through the walk, I'm going to write an essay about the alchemy of opposites.
Mm,
And that something beautiful happens at this juncture of opposites. So that was, one chapter in the book. And so each chapter, I had to look for the theme as it developed. And it might be about, being uncomfortable with religion. So if you asked me, what was the topic, that's completely different. Well, we're going to a march and I'm going to teach you all about marshes and birds and the history of this land. That's all in there too. But the thing that makes it richest is the thematic layering. So once I know, oh, it's the alchemy of opposites, there's some magic in that. It helps me know what to emphasize, what to layer. So we had other things that developed, a death. How comfortable are we with religion, our spirituality? What are we told about spirituality that's true and not true? So it was a really good book to write to look at theme. And I know with my students in writing, that's often something that they think is the hard part. Like, oh, I don't want to talk about theme. I remember one time I got a student evaluation. She talks too much about theme. It's like, I really want the writing to be magic, and I think there's magic in that because the theme isn't something you think of, it's something you find in the text, in the early text,
Right.
and when you find it, it's gold because then you get to exploit that. If someone's writing a memoir, like, what do I leave in and what do I take out? Right? We've had busy lives. Nobody wants to hear your life story. So the what you're writing about is your topic, but the theme is the why. And if you're
Mm.
writing a business book, nowadays they're full of personal anecdotes, right? So we've got this personal thematic writing in everything from a business book to memoir to novels, because, you know, novels are thematically rich also. So I've taken you quite a way into my writing career there.
Understood. Yeah, well, I appreciate you kind of walking me through first, how Every Natural Fact came to be. Very inspiring story, and it sounds like it was a very personal time for you and your son. But if you're listening today and you're interested in learning more, well, you can dive into the book and learn more about it and experience Amy's journey. But I think since you started talking about theme, it's a very good segue into that topic as well. I think what resonated most with me is your definition of it. A theme is your why in a book, right? So, um, how do you discover that why for a story? Like, does it come before you start writing or emerge as you go? Can it be planned? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I always think no surprise for me, no surprise for the reader.
Okay.
And of course, I'm not the definitive expert on anybody else's writing process, but I've read a lot of being a teacher, you read a lot of stuff where people are like performing and it's not authentic. And so that going in that a writer has to do to figure out what exactly do I have? What's special about my message and me and what I'm seeing and how I'm seeing it really requires a lot of like shaking off of, well, we're trying to please everybody, or we're, just, I want to get this exactly right. And that's why I'm such a big fan of pre-writing.
Mm,
Like you do this pre-writing, and in the pre-writing, you find the gold. You find, oh, that's a metaphor for something else. Or you find um, something that isn't true. In fact, I just finished another book, which is with a trial agent. I should say that. I don't have a firm agent on this next book yet, but early in the draft, I had written, I feel empty. And I realized, oh, that was a lie. I'm not empty. What am I? And then it's looking for what is the true thing that I wanted to say there. And so I found that from my first book, and I've written other books in between, and this last book I'm reading, that there are themes in my life that repeat over and over, and they're related to authenticity and voice and power,
right.
because I often have felt powerless. I'm a little older than you are, and I felt constrained by my role as a woman frequently in my life.
Mm,
And I would have told you, I'm an extrovert. I've been standing up for myself. I'm not small, but I realize that when you go deep and find those themes in your life, they're related to how you think, how you feel, and how you're evolving. And certainly when I wrote Every Other Natural Fact, each chapter, they're connected, but each chapter has its own theme. So we have a lot of themes, but I know that the thing that is deep in me is this idea of authenticity. Am I going to go out into nature, like in Every Natural Fact, turn down the salesmanship of civilization, turn all that down? Or in this last book, which it's about SAS, A Revolution of Becoming and Belonging, that's the working title.
mm,
Now I'm diving into the lies, secrets, and assumptions that underpinned my identity because I'm looking for what voices are in my head that I didn't put there. And were are voices that are in my head that are not for my benefit. They're for somebody else's benefit who wants me to behave and be limited in a certain way. And this is something that I realize now has been important to me from the beginning of my life through now. I think when people do a lot of writing, you start to identify these themes in your own life. So I might have some themes like, even though I want to be powerful and I don't want to be limited, I'm also a caregiver and a nurturer. I became a nurse. I think in your life, you have these big themes and your sub themes. Get to know yourself, not what other people think. Like, um, I love my mother very much, but if you open up my cupboard and my spices are all lined up, well, she's going to value me very highly for that. Oh, your spice cupboard is in such good order. That's not important to me. So I'm old enough now to know what's not important, what is important. And I think you find your themes in your experiences, your reaction to them, and casting off the voices that are not yours.
Understood. Well, thank you for walking us through that whole process. My goodness. Many of that was very important. I think we can all resonate, but a lot of what you're saying is your theme is personal to you. It resonates from your experiences as a woman, like you said. So, how do you make sure that resonates with readers across different ages, different backgrounds, different genders? I mean, you seem to have done that in your book. So, is there a certain practice that you use to take your theme and make it like relatable to everybody or to connect with others?
Well, one thing is I don't talk about the theme directly.
Well, of course.
And um, what I'm trying to do is give the reader a rich experience. And what I don't want to do is be obtuse. And I mean, I think there's some writers who are writing to a very narrow group of people. Like if you want to be, a literary snob and you only are going to write this certain way. Actually, I was at an Iowa writers convention early in my career, and he said, I'm trying to think, maybe it was Scott Russell Sanders. He said, I think about getting into a taxi cab, like a tall taxi cab, that one you can almost stand in, big ones like in when you go to Europe. I hadn't been to Europe at the time, so I didn't know what he meant. But he said, it's easy to get in, but once you get in there, you can stand up pretty tall, look around, there's a lot of room in there. So to reach the reader, I think about that. Make it easy for them to get into this world and into this concept. But then make it rich enough that maybe they'll want to read it again or stand up and turn around and think about it. And if the writing isn't thematically rich, I think you can go through and have a really nice experience, close the book, move on with your life. That book is done. But if you
Right.
make it thematically rich, I think they take it with them.
Understood. Yeah, no, you're right. And that's how, the book gets talked about and spread and the message, like as you said, they can learn from the message and apply it to their lives even years from down the road. They might even think about it. So I love that tip. Um, so we kind of talked about how to come up with your message, how to weave it into your book. Now, kind of, I would say the third step is like, how do you make sure that it's like clearly portrayed, like kind of like a check, like to make sure that you're getting the right message across? Is there like a certain, maybe like beta reader feedback or you're just reading it yourself, a certain way to make sure that the message you're trying to get across is there? Have you ever come across that sort of thing before?
Yes, I have. And often I'm trying to say too much,
Mm,
or I've fallen in love with this cute little story I have. And, if I think about the theme and the journey, what is the journey for the reader?
right,
And what is the thematic connection that is going to give them this rich experience and carry them all the way through? Because if I think of it experientially, then I can look at it. And I think that takeaway comes in the editing, where did I give them enough? I'll give you an example. I want to say something I see in early students writing. They would say, "Oh, my grandmother loved me to the moon and back." It's a cliche. But I don't have to say my grandmother loves me. If I tell the story that my dad used to work second shift, and we would drive up north in Wisconsin, up north, people will know that is more rural. I'm driving up north. He worked second shift. We're driving in the middle of the night. We get there. It's early in the morning. and Grandma's in the kitchen. There's a yellow aluminum edge table, and on the table, she has chocolate chip cookies, my favorite, brownies, my sister's favorites, fresh baked bread, a custard pie. She's been up all night so that when we arrive at 5 o'clock in the morning, the table is full. And I can smell the brownies, and my mother is cutting into the pie before it's really settled and it's oozing over. And my grandpa has suspenders over his white thermal shirt with his big hard belly. And he says, I'll give you a quarter if you punch me in the belly. It's all muscle. So if I pull some of those details together, I don't have to tell you my grandma loved me. She stayed all night cooking for me. So
Right.
what I have to do is have you say, the reader, her grandma really loved her. She
Right.
loved the whole family. So I think it's the details that you give the reader a journey so that they can make some of those conclusions for themselves. And as we're going through thematically to give the journey, that they're having an experience, I'm not just telling them about my experience. And that's how, in the end, I work hard to craft a meaningful journey for the reader.
Understood. So in a way, it's kind of like, the age-old show don't tell uh, tip, but more so for theme rather than just description, trying to get the reader to come to it on their own terms is what I'm hearing from this. So I love that
Yes.
tip, and that's very clever. I love it. I think that a lot of people can certainly learn from this. Authors struggle with creating themes. You know what I mean? So it's important that we think about this and highlight it as we get into our writing. I love this. Thank you. Um, so
Could I say something about that show don't tell?
yeah, yeah.
I
What do
just
you?
have to, because I studied with Philip Lopate, and I don't know, he writes narrative nonfiction, which is a form I absolutely love.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Show and Tell.
Uh,
And so I just want to say that I'm for it's okay to tell as long as you're a fascinating, interesting character that I want to be with.
mm,
And a lot of times people don't treat the narrator in narrative nonfiction as another character. They're kind of like just a dry voice telling the story. So I like show and tell, but the tell's got to be fascinating too. Like, just be a real, authentic character. So I just wanted to throw that in.
I love that. No, that's another great snippet too. That makes a lot of sense. I was just kind of saying that because I feel like I've heard that like over and over. But that's another good point too, as well. So. But I'd love to segue back to your work a little bit, because we could talk all day about theme, but I want to give you a chance to spotlight some of your other work and things because people now they're inspired by you, they're inspired to apply your theme teachings to their own writing, but they also want to learn more about you. So you do have this book that we were talking about, but you mentioned you have some other projects you're working on. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. Well, I am committed to people having a voice and using it. So, in addition to writing many essays, articles, like hundreds and hundreds of essays and articles I've published through my students, when I get really good essays, they inspired me. So, I've also edited two collections, anthologies, one called Friends, all about different kinds of friendships. And it's not hallmarky at all. It's about friendships that come and go and really kind of honoring all these messages. Really nice writing. The other is called Corners, and it's when you have a corner in your life and you have to change, and it's essays about that. Um, and now I'm working on this book where both of my parents passed, and I realized there were secrets, things that were told to me. I don't think they were true because I have different stories, and I decided I'm going to unravel what are the secrets, lies, and assumptions, that underpinned my reality. And I realized as I was writing it, Amy, this is thematically really connected to that first book because you're looking at, hey, what am I building my life upon? And, what did I just assume was true that wasn't true? So I'm working on that. I have actually, the book is done. So it was done for the first pass to editors and agents. And I also run a site that helps writers and a lot of free articles at amyloujenkins.com. And right now I'm doing actually a giveaway for my book, Every Natural Fact. And the reason I'm doing a giveaway is the agents said, Amy, build your list for the next book. So I thought, if you'd like to start the journey with Every Natural Fact, stay on my list. We'll have you, on the list. I'll tell you when the other book comes out. And in the meantime, I do a lot of free information support community for authors. And I hope people would join me. My newsletter is called Lit Friends, and we like to support each other's work in that community.
Understood. Well, hey, we'll put that link in the description box of this podcast today. So guys, go ahead and click on over. And that's so exciting that you have the giveaway too. It's a great way for people to get, to learn a little more about it and get connected into your world. Are there any other sites that people can head to get connected as well, aside from the newsletter? Anything else
Well,
that
I have published traditionally, but the anthologies that I put together for my writing students, those are published through Jack Walker Press. So it's jackwalkerpress.com, and you'll find some information about those other anthologies. And I know you have a writing community, so we still have an open call for essays about aging. And by aging, people think, oh, that's for old people to write about. Well, if you're 2 days old, you're aging. So so
that's
any
true.
it could be going into college, getting into you realize you've hit a different point in your career. It could be, I wrote an essay one time about my mother throwing me the car keys. That first time, here, you drive. I went to go visit her, and I suddenly felt older, as those keys arched up in that circle and I caught them in my hand. I'm like, oh, I'm in a new phase now. So that could spark something about aging. So if you go to jackwalkerpress.com, you'll find the call for submissions there. And we're looking for writers who want to write about that and be in our next anthology.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for opening it up to our listeners today. Everyone, that's an incredible opportunity. I'm going to put the links to that in the description box of this podcast too. So we'll go ahead and click on over and give it a shot, right? I love that. Thank you so much for that offer, Amy. I think we can really benefit from that.
Well, great. I'd love to receive some entries from your audience.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it. But hey, in the meantime, as we begin to wrap up today, I'm curious to know if you have any other tips and tricks you'd like to leave the audience off with today. Perhaps anything more about a theme or anything that you just find very useful in the writing process for yourself.
Well, one of the things that I find very useful is the idea of a continuum, that most of the lessons that we learn exist on a continuum.
Mm.
So, on the one hand, I don't want cliches and old writing. I don't want you to tell me you mean the world to me. I mean, I'm sorry. I'd rather have a list of all the cool things you know about me than for you to say you know the world about me. And that's true for writing also. So I don't like the cliches. And then some people say, well, that means just use ordinary language all the time. Well, we don't want to sound like we've just taken a bath in the thesaurus either. But finding the balance and the right thing for each project, the right voice for each character that you're writing for, it exists on a continuum, and you have to find the right space. There are no absolutes. I had somebody write one time, they had pulled out the thesaurus and they wrote, I voyaged on to the Piggly Wiggly. Well, I mean,
Okay.
they wanted to write an interesting verb. I didn't think that worked.
Not
I
quite, not quite.
no, no. So, but one time I was writing about taking a boat ride in a area that had been dammed. They had cut the tops off of all the trees. I'm trying to think of one word. I think it took me 6 months to find the right word. And I had written decapitated. And I'm like, too much, too much. And eventually I realized, oh, it's truncated. That's
Mm,
where that word comes from. That is the precise, correct word when you cut off the top of a tree. But we use it for computer terms. So that whole, every lesson you have is on a continuum. If they say show, don't tell, well, some telling, some is good.
right.
So that's my big advice, is to make peace with the ambiguity of the continuum.
I like that. No, that's absolutely true. And people have to kind of be flexible to figure out, to give themselves that time and patience with their own mind as they're figuring out the right words and the right way to present a topic or whatever it might be, and to figure out the right placement. So I
And
appreciate
that's why what we do is such a art
that. Yeah, yeah.
because
Every
we're
situation is
finding
different.
the truth, the method, the way to do it.
Exactly, exactly. And I love that. And that's what the best part of it writing is, right? It's all on a continuum. It's all up for grabs. It depends on the writing, the context, the message you're trying to get across, and the theme. So
Yes.
great way to circle back to that. Amy, this has been a really inspiring conversation, very insightful, very informative, and yeah, and very opportunistic as well. Because guys, again, you can check out the links in the description box of this podcast, and see what opportunities await once you get connected with Amy. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much for all that you do for writers, readers, authors, and for important messages.
Of course, and thank you as well. And to our audience, thank you too for joining us on our episode today. If you're inspired, check out the links, check out Amy's book, and check out the next episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. Until next time, keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.